The imperial warship Vethkara was 3 days into deep space when everything went wrong. It was supposed to be a quiet transit. No battles. No border crossings. Just a long, dark stretch of empty space between two star systems, with nothing to do but wait. The crew had settled into their routines. The soldiers ran their drills. The attendants prepared the royal meals. The engineers checked their readings every hour. And the warship moved through the darkness like a slow, heavy shadow, carrying 10,000 souls and one very important passenger. Prince Soren was 7 years old by dragon reckoning, which made him roughly the size of a large dog and roughly the temperament of a thunderstorm. He had silver-blue scales, bright gold eyes, and a tail he had not yet learned to control. He knocked things over constantly. He asked questions no one could answer. He refused to sleep at the proper hour and insisted on pressing his nose against every porthole he could reach. His attendants adored him and were also exhausted by him. That evening, after a long meal and an even longer argument about whether Soren was allowed to visit the ship's engine bay, his chief attendant finally got him settled into his sleeping chamber. The room was warm and fitted with soft nesting materials imported from the home world. The door was locked from the outside. 2 guards stood posted in the hall. It should have been fine. It was not fine. When the attendant returned 2 hours later with a warm drink, the chamber was empty. The nesting materials were scattered. The porthole above the sleeping shelf was unlatched and swinging gently. And Prince Soren, heir to the Draconis throne, was simply gone. The alarm did not come quietly. Commander Vaildris was in the officers' hall when his comm unit screamed at him. He was a tall, broad-shouldered dragon with dark green scales and 30 years of military service behind him. He had served in 3 wars, survived 2 ship disasters, and never once lost his composure in front of his soldiers. He lost it slightly now. "Seal every deck," he said, and his voice came out very low and very controlled, which everyone around him recognized as the most frightening version of him. "Every corridor, every access hatch, every maintenance shaft. Nobody moves without clearance. Find him." Within 4 minutes, the Vethkara was locked down. Soldiers moved in pairs through every level of the ship. Thermal scanners were pulled from storage and activated. Every room was checked. Every cabinet was opened. Guards who had been sleeping were woken. Guards who were eating abandoned their meals. The entire ship turned itself inside out looking for one small silver-blue hatchling with a wandering nature and absolutely no sense of danger. They did not find him on the upper decks. They did not find him in the officer quarters. They did not find him near the engine monitoring room, which had been Soren's stated destination before bedtime. What they did not think to check immediately, because it was loud and smelled like old coolant and no royal child had any business being there, was maintenance level 4. Glenn was not having a bad evening. He was having the kind of evening he actually preferred, which was quiet, slightly greasy, and completely free of anyone asking him to attend a briefing. He was 26 years old, a third-year hull and systems technician, and he had been assigned to Vethkara for 8 months. In that time he had fixed 211 things and attended exactly 0 social gatherings, which he considered a personal achievement. He was currently lying on his back underneath a coolant distribution pipe that had been leaking for the past week. The work was simple but slow. He had his toolkit beside him, a small light clipped to his collar, and a half-eaten nutrition bar balanced on his knee. The corridor around him was dim and narrow, lined with pipes and bundled cables that ran the length of the ship like the inside of a very organized creature. He could hear, very faintly, some kind of alarm activity on the upper levels. Boots moving fast. Distant voices. He assumed it was a drill. There were always drills. He went back to his pipe. He was tightening a secondary seal when he heard something else. It was small. A soft scraping sound, like claws on metal, moving slowly. Then a pause. Then the scraping again, closer. Glenn turned his head. At the far end of the corridor, where the shadow was deepest, something was moving. It was low to the ground and moving unevenly, like it was dragging itself more than walking. Glenn reached up and adjusted his collar light so it shone a little further down the passage. The light caught a pair of gold eyes. Then it caught silver blue scales. Then it caught the rest of him, a small dragon hatchling, no bigger than a medium-sized dog, crawling along the base of the corridor wall with one wing dragging and his head hanging low. He moved another 2 steps, stopped, and looked up at Glenn with an expression that was equal parts exhausted and deeply uncertain. Glenn looked back at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then the hatchling took 3 more slow steps forward, reached the edge of Glenn's work light and simply sat down. His legs folded under him. His tail curled around his own feet. His gold eyes blinked once, twice, and then stayed open just barely, watching Glenn with the careful attention of a creature that was too tired to run but had not yet decided if it was safe to stay. Glenn did not move quickly. He did not reach out. He did not make a sound. He simply looked at the hatchling, then looked at the corridor around him, and then looked back. "Okay," Glenn said, very quietly. The hatchling's ears flicked. Glenn slowly reached beside him and pulled out the second half of his nutrition bar. It was plain, slightly dry, and tasted like oats and mild disappointment, but he broke off a small piece and set it on the floor between them. Then he turned back to his pipe and kept working. He did not stare. He did not crowd. He just worked. After a long moment, he heard small claws move across the floor. A pause. Then the soft sound of something being sniffed. Then chewing. Glenn said nothing. He finished tightening the seal, moved to the next joint, and kept going. The alarm sounds above were getting slightly louder. More boots. He still assumed it was a drill. By the time he had finished the next section of pipe and sat up to check his work, the hatchling had crossed the remaining distance between them and was sitting directly beside his leg, pressed against his side, eyes finally closing. Glenn looked down at him. The little one was asleep. Glenn unzipped his outer work jacket, laid it gently over the hatchling's back, and went back to work. Above them, on every deck of the Vethkara, an entire military force was tearing the ship apart. Down here, it was quiet. Glenn finished checking the pipe seal and sat up slowly. The hatchling was still asleep against his side, breathing in small, steady pulls, his silver blue scales rising and falling beneath the work jacket. One small claw had found the edge of Glenn's sleeve and was holding it loosely, not gripping, just resting there, the way a child holds something familiar in the dark without fully waking up. Glenn looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up his toolkit and moved carefully to the next section of pipe, making sure not to jostle the little one. He worked quietly, keeping his movements slow and steady. The alarm noise from the upper levels had not stopped. If anything, it had grown slightly more organized, which Glenn had decided meant it was a serious drill rather than a casual one. He made a mental note to check the crew board later and went back to his coupling wrench. He was halfway through checking a pressure valve when the hatchling stirred. It happened gradually. First the tail uncurled. Then the wings shifted. Then the gold eyes opened, unfocused at first, and then sharp and immediate, the way eyes get when a creature remembers all at once that it is not in a safe place. Soren sat up fast. His head turned left, then right. His ears pressed flat. His small chest was heaving. Glenn did not look up from the valve. "Morning," he said, very casually, as if small dragon hatchlings woke up next to him every shift. Soren froze. His gold eyes locked onto Glenn. Every muscle in his small body was wound tight, ready to run, ready to bolt back into the dark corridor and disappear again. Glenn set down his wrench. He reached beside him, opened his kit bag, and pulled out a small packet of ration crackers. He tore the top open, took one out, and placed the packet on the floor between them without looking directly at Soren. Then he picked his wrench back up and returned to the valve. Soren stared at the crackers. He stared at Glenn. He stared at the crackers again. Slowly, with the intense caution of someone defusing something dangerous, he reached out one small claw and pulled the packet toward himself. He sniffed it. He licked one cracker. He decided it was acceptable and ate 3 of them in quick succession, still watching Glenn the entire time. Glenn said nothing. He just worked. This went on for a while. It was another 20 minutes before Soren spoke. His voice was small and slightly rough from whatever he had been through in the corridors, but it was clear. He spoke in the common trade language that most species used aboard imperial vessels, the one every crew member learned in their first week. "You are not going to report me," Soren said. It was not quite a question. Glenn looked up at him. "Report you for what?" Soren blinked. "For being here." "You're not breaking anything," Glenn said. "And you're not in my way." He nodded at the pipes around them. "Plenty of room." Soren looked at the pipes. He looked at the low ceiling. He looked at the bundles of cables running along the walls. He seemed to be evaluating the space with fresh eyes, and whatever conclusion he reached appeared to satisfy him slightly, because his ears came up a little from where they had been pressed flat. "This place smells strange," Soren said. "Coolant fluid," Glenn said. "You get used to it." "I do not think I will get used to it." "Probably not," Glenn agreed pleasantly, and went back to work. Soren watched him. He watched the way Glenn's hands moved, steady and practiced, turning a valve here, checking a reading there, moving along the pipe with the unhurried confidence of someone who had done this same work 1,000 times and found it perfectly satisfying. There was no tension in him. No urgency. He was not alarmed by the sounds from above. He was not alarmed by Soren. He seemed, genuinely and completely, unbothered by everything. Soren had never met anyone like that. Everyone around him was always alarmed by something. His attendants were alarmed if he sneezed too loudly. The guards were alarmed if he walked too close to a railing. Even his father's advisors, ancient dragons with scales gone gray at the edges, watched him with a constant low-level anxiety that never fully left their eyes. This human just worked on his pipe. "What is your name?" Soren asked. "Glenn." "Glenn," Soren repeated, as if testing the shape of it. "That is a very short name." "It is," Glenn agreed. "My name is longer," Soren said, with a small amount of pride. "I believe you," Glenn said. Soren almost smiled. Not quite. But almost. An hour passed. The alarm activity above them had shifted from organized sweeping sounds to something more urgent. Soren heard it too. His ears tracked the noise through the ceiling with the automatic precision of a creature built to listen. His body went still every time the boots above got louder, and relaxed again when they faded. Glenn noticed this. He did not comment on it. He simply adjusted his position so that he was sitting between Soren and the corridor entrance, not blocking it, not trapping the hatchling, just present. A quiet wall between the little one and whatever was making him tense. Soren noticed this too. He said nothing about it. But he moved slightly closer. Glenn reached into his kit bag and pulled out a second nutrition bar. He broke it in half and held one piece out without looking at Soren directly. Soren took it after a 3-second pause that was clearly meant to look casual and did not entirely succeed. They sat together in the dim corridor, eating in companionable silence, while somewhere above them an entire warship looked for one of them. "Glenn," Soren said eventually. "Yeah. Are you not curious who I am?" Glenn considered this for a moment. "You're a hatchling who ended up in my corridor," he said. "That's enough for now." Soren was quiet for a beat. "Most people want to know immediately. Most people ask too many questions," Glenn said simply. Another silence. This one was different from the others. Softer. I do not want to go back up there yet, Soren said. His voice had lost its careful royal steadiness. Underneath it was something much younger and much more honest. It is very loud up there. And everyone looks at me like I am going to break. Glenn looked at him then, a direct look, calm and even. You don't look like you're going to break, he said. Soren held his gaze. Something in the hatchling's chest seemed to loosen slightly, like a knot that had been pulled tight for a very long time. No, Soren said quietly. I am not. Glenn nodded once, as if that settled something, and turned back to his pipe. Soren curled himself against the wall beside Glenn's knee, tucked the work jacket back over his wings, and stayed. Above them, the search continued. Down here, for the first time in a long while, the heir to the Draconis throne felt something he had almost forgotten the shape of. Calm. 3 hours. Commander Valdris stood in the central operations room on deck 2 and stared at the wall display showing every level of the Vethkara. Red markers moved across the screen in slow, sweeping patterns. Each marker was a search team. Each search team had a thermal scanner, a comm unit, and orders to check every room, every shaft, every crawlspace on their assigned level. None of the markers had stopped moving. That meant none of them had found anything. Valdris pressed his hands flat against the operations table and breathed slowly through his nose. He was a soldier. He had trained for crisis. He had written the emergency protocols for this very ship. He knew exactly what to do when things went wrong. What he had not written a protocol for was this specific situation, which was a 7-year-old hatchling vanishing completely from a sealed warship in the middle of empty space. His comm unit buzzed. He already knew who it was before he answered. The Emperor's voice was quiet. That was always the warning sign. Loud anger was manageable. Quiet anger from the Emperor of the Draconis throne was something else entirely. 3 hours, Commander. Yes, Your Majesty. My son. We are conducting a full sweep of every level, Your Majesty. Every thermal scanner on the ship is active. Every corridor is being checked. A pause. And yet. We will find him, Your Majesty. Another pause, longer this time. You will find him unharmed, Commander. That is not a request. The transmission ended. Valdris set down the comm unit with great care, turned to his senior officer, and said, very quietly, tell the teams to go faster. The problem, which no one had fully accounted for, was the cold. Young dragon hatchlings had a stress response that was the opposite of what most species experienced. When frightened, when overwhelmed, when pushed past a certain point of exhaustion, their body temperature did not rise. It dropped. It was an old survival mechanism, something buried deep in dragon biology from a time when hatchlings needed to hide from larger predators in cold mountain caves. A frightened hatchling went cold and still and nearly invisible to anything hunting by heat. The thermal scanners were excellent pieces of equipment. They could detect a warm body through 3 layers of wall plating. They could find a crew member hiding in a storage cabinet from 20 meters away. They had been designed by the best military engineers in the Empire. They were completely useless against a stressed hatchling whose body temperature had dropped to match the ambient cool of a maintenance corridor. The search team swept maintenance level 4 twice. They found Glenn's heat signature both times, a single warm human shape lying on his back under a pipe, working. They noted it, confirmed it was a crew technician on a logged shift, and moved on. They did not see the second shape beside him. It was too cool. Too still. Too perfectly pressed against the metal wall to register as anything other than a shadow on the scanner screen. Soren slept through both sweeps without moving. Glenn heard them the second time. He had finished the coolant pipe section and moved on to checking a series of pressure regulators further down the corridor. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor with his diagnostic reader in one hand, going through the readings one by one, when he heard the boots. They were close this time. One level up, moving in a pattern, not the random movement of crew going about their business but the deliberate, grid-style movement of people looking for something specific. He could hear voices too, low and clipped, the kind of voices that belonged to soldiers following orders. He looked up at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at Soren. The hatchling was asleep against his left arm, deeply and completely asleep in the way that only very young creatures and very tired ones can manage. His silver-blue scales had gone slightly dull, which Glenn did not know was a cold response, but which he had decided meant the little one needed to stay warm. He had tucked the work jacket more firmly around Soren's wings an hour ago and had not moved his arm since, even when it started to ache. The boots above grew louder. A door opened somewhere. Closed again. Soren's ear twitched in his sleep. Glenn looked at the ear. He looked at the ceiling. He looked back at his diagnostic reader. He started humming. It was nothing in particular. A low, tuneless sound, the kind of thing he did when he was working and the corridor was too quiet. It filled the space between the pipes and the cables and the distant sounds of boots on metal, and it was warm in the way that quiet sounds sometimes are, not beautiful, not skilled, just present and steady and human. Soren's ear stopped twitching. His breathing evened out again. Glenn went back to his pressure regulator readings. On deck 3, directly above them, a guard named Fetch pressed his thermal scanner against the floor grating and swept it slowly across the reading field. The screen showed the warm shape of the human technician below, same as before. Fetch tilted the scanner slightly, checking the edges of the corridor. Nothing. He stood up, rolled his shoulders, and moved on to the next section. Valdris called the team leaders to a central point on deck 3 and looked at each of them in turn. They were good soldiers. Experienced. Thorough. He had chosen each of them personally for the high guard because they did not make mistakes and they did not miss things. "We have swept every upper deck 3 times, he said. "We have checked every officer cabin, every storage room, every crawlspace above the waterline. The scanners show nothing." He paused. "Which means he is somewhere the scanners cannot find him, or somewhere we have not looked carefully enough." He looked at the display on his handheld unit. "Lower maintenance levels. We go down. Every team. Now." The team leaders moved. Soren woke slowly this time. He came up from sleep in stages, first awareness, then memory, then the immediate quiet check of his surroundings that young hatchlings do before they move. His gold eyes opened and found the same dim corridor, the same pipes, the same cables. The same human sitting beside him with a small diagnostic tool, working through readings with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. He could hear the boots again. Closer than before. Much closer. His scales tightened. Glenn felt the small body beside him go rigid. He did not look up. He reached into his kit bag, found the last of the ration crackers, and set them quietly on the floor between them. "Still there," he said, meaning the crackers. Soren looked at them. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at Glenn. "They are getting closer," Soren said. His voice was very small. "Probably," Glenn said. "You are not worried?" Glenn considered this honestly. "I'm on a logged shift in a maintenance corridor," he said. "I haven't done anything wrong." He glanced at Soren briefly. "Neither have you." Soren stared at him. Then he picked up a cracker and ate it. The boots moved closer in the dark above them, steady and searching, sweeping toward the lowest level of the ship one careful section at a time. Glenn hummed quietly and turned to the next reading on his list. The boots reached maintenance level 4 at the start of the 4th hour. Glenn heard them come through the access hatch at the far end of the corridor. The sound was different now. Not the muffled movement of soldiers one level up, but actual boots on the same floor, the same metal, close enough that the vibration came through the wall and into the ground beneath him. Soren heard it too. He had been half asleep again, pressed against Glenn's arm with the work jacket tucked around his wings. The moment the hatch opened, his eyes came fully open and his whole body went tight. His small claws found Glenn's sleeve and gripped it, not hard enough to tear, but firmly, the way a child grips a hand in a crowd. Glenn felt it. He did not shake the grip loose. He just sat there, steady and warm, and let the hatchling hold on. The boots moved slowly down the corridor. Glenn could see the edge of a scanner light playing across the far wall, sweeping in a careful arc. One soldier. Maybe two. Moving methodically, checking each section before moving to the next. Soren pressed himself closer. His breathing had gone very shallow. Glenn looked down at him. The little one's gold eyes were fixed on the far end of the corridor, wide and unblinking. His ears were flat. Every scale on his small body was pulled tight. Glenn did the only thing he could think of. He went back to work. He picked up his diagnostic reader, pulled up the next pressure reading on the list, and began checking it with the same unhurried focus he had used all evening. His movements were slow and deliberate. Nothing rushed. Nothing alarmed. Just a technician finishing his shift, doing what he came down here to do. Soren looked up at him. Glenn did not look back. He just worked. After a moment, some of the tension went out of the hatchling's small shoulders. The scanner light grew brighter on the wall. The guard who found them was young. His name was Pell, and he was 19 years old, and he had been on the high guard for exactly 4 months. He had spent the last 4 hours moving through the ship's lower levels with a thermal scanner and a growing sense of dread, because 4 hours was a very long time to search for a missing prince, and finding nothing was somehow worse than finding something bad. He turned the corner into the final maintenance bay on level 4 with his scanner raised and his light sweeping forward. He stopped. The scanner dropped slightly in his hands. In the middle of the corridor, surrounded by pipes and cables and the general organized mess of a working maintenance section, a human technician was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a diagnostic reader in one hand. Beside him, pressed against his left arm with a work jacket tucked around its wings, was a small silver-blue hatchling with gold eyes. The hatchling was asleep. One small claw was wrapped firmly around the human's sleeve. Pell stood completely still for a long moment. He looked at the hatchling. He looked at the human. He looked at the hatchling again. His scanner showed one warm human signature and, now that he was close enough and looking directly at the right spot, the faint, cool outline of something very small pressed against the human's side. His hand moved to his comm unit. Glenn looked up. He saw the young soldier standing at the entrance to the bay, scanner in hand, light pointed directly at them. He saw the soldier's expression, which was somewhere between relieved and completely unable to process what he was seeing. Glenn looked at Soren, still asleep against his arm. He looked back at the soldier. He seemed tired, Glenn said quietly. I didn't want to wake him. Pell opened his comm unit and said 3 words into it. I found him. Valdris arrived in 4 minutes. He came with 6 guards and his senior officer, and the kind of speed that only comes from 4 hours of desperate searching finally reaching its end. His boots were loud on the corridor floor, his armor catching the maintenance lights as he turned the corner, his expression set into the hard, controlled lines of a commander who had been preparing for the worst and had not allowed himself to think about what the worst might look like. He turned into the bay. He stopped. Behind him, his 6 guards stopped. His senior officer stopped. Everyone stopped. The scene before them was very simple. A human technician sitting on the floor of a maintenance corridor, tools beside him, diagnostic reader in his hand, looking up at them with a calm and mildly curious expression. And against the human's arm, wrapped in a worn work jacket, curled in the deep and total sleep of a creature that had finally felt safe enough to let go, was Prince Soren. Heir to the Draconis throne. Missing for 4 hours and 11 minutes. One small claw still holding the human's sleeve. Nobody spoke. Veldris looked at the hatchling for a long moment. He checked the rise and fall of the small chest. He checked the color of the scales. He checked the position of the wings, loose and relaxed, not tucked tight the way they went when a hatchling was in distress. Soren was fine. Soren was, by every visible measure, deeply comfortable. Veldris moved his eyes to the human. Glenn met his gaze without any particular expression. He was not afraid. He was not nervous. He did not have the look of someone who had done something wrong and knew it. He had the look of someone who had been doing his job all evening and had added one small extra task to the list without making a fuss about it. "How long?" Veldris said. His voice came out lower than he intended. "About 4 hours," Glenn said. He came out of the corridor on his own. He was cold and tired. I gave him a jacket and some crackers. He paused. He fell asleep about 20 minutes in. Been there since. Veldris looked at the jacket. It was a standard human maintenance jacket, slightly worn at the elbows, with a small manufacturer's patch on the chest. It was wrapped carefully around Soren's wings and tucked in at the edges. He looked at the crackers. An empty packet beside the hatchling's foot. He looked at Glenn. "You did not report it," Veldris said. "I didn't know there was anything to report," Glenn said simply. "He wasn't doing any harm. Neither was I." One of the guards behind Veldris shifted. Another exchanged a look with the one beside him. His senior officer made a small sound that was very carefully not a reaction. Veldris stood in the middle of maintenance level 4 and looked at a sleeping prince wrapped in a human's work jacket and did not say anything for a very long time. Then he crouched down slowly until he was level with the sleeping hatchling. Soren's face in sleep was completely relaxed. No tension in the jaw. No tightness around the eyes. The expression was simple and unguarded and very young. Veldris had known Soren since the hatchling was 3 days old. He had never seen him sleep like that. He stood back up. He looked at Glenn one more time. Glenn looked back at him, patient and unhurried, waiting to see what happened next, with a missing prince's claw still wrapped around his sleeve. "Do not wake him," Veldris said finally. He stepped back. He folded his hands behind his back, and he waited. The entire High Guard stood in silence around a single human technician in a dim maintenance corridor, and not one of them said a word. Soren woke the way he always did. All at once. His eyes opened, his ears came up, and his whole body pulled into immediate awareness in the space of a single breath. It was a hatchling thing, that instant waking, the instinct that said the world did not wait for you to finish sleeping and it was better to meet it ready. He was ready. And then he saw what was around him and every bit of that readiness turned into something else entirely. There were guards everywhere. Not 2. Not 4. A full corridor of them, standing in complete silence, armored and tall, their faces carefully neutral in the way soldiers practice for years. Behind them stood attendants in imperial dress, 2 of his own personal attendants among them, their expressions a mixture of profound relief and the specific exhaustion of people who had spent 4 hours imagining terrible things. At the front of all of them stood Commander Veldris, arms folded behind his back, watching Soren with the steady eyes of a man who had a great deal to say and had decided none of it was appropriate for right now. Soren looked at all of this. Then he looked at Glenn. Glenn was still sitting exactly where he had been all evening. Diagnostic reader set aside now, hands resting on his knees, looking at Soren with the same calm and unhurried expression he had worn since the first moment Soren had crawled out of the dark corridor and found him. There was no tension in him. No urgency. He was not leaning away from the wall of soldiers behind him. He was not leaning toward them either. He was just there. Solid and quiet and completely himself. Soren's claw tightened on his sleeve. He did not do it consciously. It happened the way breathing happens, without decision, without thought. His small claws found the fabric of Glenn's sleeve and held it, and that was simply what occurred. Glenn looked down at the claw. He looked back up at Soren. "Morning," he said. Soren stared at him. Then, very quietly, so that only Glenn could hear it, he said, "There are a great many soldiers." "Yeah," Glenn said. "They are here for me." "Probably," Glenn agreed. "I do not want to go yet." Glenn was quiet for a moment. He looked at Valdris, who was watching this exchange with an expression that had moved somewhere beyond professional neutrality into something more complicated. Then Glenn looked back at Soren. "You'll be okay," he said. "They're not here because you did something wrong. They're here because they were worried." Soren considered this. His gold eyes moved across the wall of guards and came back to Glenn's face. "Were you worried?" Glenn thought about it honestly. "I knew you were safe," he said. "So no." Something moved through Soren's expression at that. Something that was not quite relief and not quite gratitude but lived in the space between both of them. His grip on the sleeve did not loosen. The Emperor arrived 18 minutes later. The corridor had been cleared slightly by then, attendants moved back, guards repositioned to give space. Valdris had sent the transmission the moment Soren was found, and the Emperor had been aboard a secondary shuttle before the next minute passed. 18 minutes was the fastest a shuttle could travel between the Imperial escort vessel trailing the warship and the Vethkara itself. 18 minutes was how long it took the most powerful dragon in the known empire to reach his son. He came through the access hatch at the end of the corridor and walked toward them, and the guards on both sides came to attention without being told. He was large, even by dragon standards, with deep gold scales and eyes the same color as Soren's, and he moved with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades learning not to show what they felt until they chose to show it. He stopped when he saw Soren. He took in the dim corridor. The pipes. The scattered toolkit. The empty cracker packet on the floor. The worn work jacket still draped over Soren's wings. The human technician sitting on the ground beside his son. And Soren himself, small and silver blue and very much alive, sitting straight and looking up at his father with an expression that was trying very hard to be composed and was mostly succeeding. One small claw still holding a human's sleeve. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the remaining distance, slowly, and crouched down in front of Soren the way very large creatures do when they want to be at eye level with something small. He looked at his son carefully, the way a parent looks when they have been frightened and are now counting the proof that everything is whole and unharmed. "Soren," he said. "Father," Soren said. "You are well." "I am well," Soren confirmed. Then, after a brief pause, "Glenn gave me crackers." The Emperor's eyes moved to Glenn. Glenn met the gaze of the Emperor of the Draconis throne with the same expression he had used on everyone else that evening, open, calm, and completely without pretension. He did not bow his head. He did not look away. He also did not puff himself up or perform any kind of confidence he did not feel. He simply looked back, one person meeting another, and waited. "You kept him safe," the Emperor said. "He kept himself safe," Glenn said. "He found a quiet spot and stayed in it. Smart instinct." He paused. "I just didn't bother him." The Emperor looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Soren again. "You will come with me now." Soren nodded. He began to move. Then he stopped. He looked down at his claw, still wrapped around Glenn's sleeve, and then up at Glenn's face. "Will I see you again?" Soren asked. Glenn opened his mouth. He did not get the chance to answer. The imperial decree came through the ship's official channel 40 minutes later. It was short. Clear. Written in the formal language of imperial administrative orders, which tended to use many words to say simple things. But the simple thing at the center of it was this. Glenn, hull and systems technician, 3rd year, was relieved of his standard maintenance rotation for the remainder of the voyage. He was reassigned, effective immediately, to the royal deck. His new duty, listed plainly in the order, was companion to Prince Soren during transit hours. Not guard. Not attendant. Not staff. Companion. Glenn read it twice in the crew break room, sitting with a mug of something warm, his toolkit still on the table beside him. Around him, other technicians were reading their own copies on their comm units, because the decree had gone to the whole crew manifest by mistake or possibly on purpose, no one was quite sure which. Nobody said anything for a while. Then the technician across the table from Glenn, a woman named Adra who had worked maintenance for 11 years and was not impressed by very much, looked up from her unit and looked at Glenn. "Companion," she said. "Apparently," Glenn said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she went back to her mug. But something had shifted in the break room. It was not loud. It was not announced. It was the quiet shift that happens when people recalibrate something they had not known needed recalibrating. The human maintenance crew of the Vethkara had always done their work without recognition, without ceremony, in the lowest corridors of the ship while the imperial world moved above them. That evening, one of them had done nothing more than stay calm, share his crackers, and not ask too many questions. And a prince had chosen to hold on. By the time the warship reached its destination 4 days later, something had changed in the way the upper deck soldiers held doors open for the maintenance crew. Something had changed in the way attendants nodded in the corridor. Small things. Quiet things. But real ones. Glenn went back to work the next morning, same tools, same corridors, same unhurried focus. The only difference was that at midday, a small silver-blue hatchling with gold eyes appeared at the entrance to his work bay, sat down beside him, and watched him fix a pressure valve with deep and serious attention. Glenn handed him a cracker. Soren took it. They sat together in comfortable silence while the warship moved through the stars.